We're on the Mishnah on the bottom of Kuf Chaf Amid Aleph, about to turn to Kuf Chaf Amid Beis. This Mishnah is addressing the issue of someone who slept in the middle of his Achilas Pesach. And he's part of a Chabura, so there'll be cases in which one individual fell asleep, in a case in which the entire Chabura, maybe it was a small Chabura, they all fell asleep. So the Mishnah establishes that Yoshnu Miktsasam, if there's still those who are awake, although some of them went to sleep, then they could continue to eat the Korban Pesach. But Kulan, if on the other hand, all the members of the Chabura fell asleep, Lo Yochelu, they're not permitted to continue to eat the Korban Pesach. Why is this so? Because with regard to Korban Pesach, there's a prohibition again of prohibiting eating the Korban Pesach in two different places. So we're afraid that if the entire group falls asleep, when they wake up, they might be tempted to eat in another place. And ein yotzim michabur lechabur, you can't go from one location to the other. Rav Yossi says, even in a case where some of them fell asleep, we can continue to eat when they wake up. That's only is nisnamnu. But nirdemu lo yochel. So there are different levels of sleep, and that's what the Gemara is going to discuss. It's something called nim velo nim, tir velo tir. And Rabbi Yossi, he says it's not an automatic. We're going to see a case where Rabbi himself fell asleep and Abai was at the Seder. It's not automatically a psul if you fall asleep, but that's only if you doze off. If you fall asleep, then they're not allowed to go back when they wake up and continue eating. And this is even in the case of Yoshnu B'Tzotzah. Now the Korban Pesach is eaten on the night of the 15th. What's the latest time after which the allotment passes and it becomes Nosach? And to our surprise, the Mishnah establishes that Pesach Liach Chatzos, once we pass Chatzos, it's midnight on the 15th, still of half the night till the morning, it already became Nosar. And the din of Nosar is that Nosar is Tameh, is Mitame. And that's called Mitame Yasiyadayim. And that's a Gzeres Chachamim, which applies to a carbon that became possible as Pigul or Nosar. Mitamim Esayadayim. So Mitzvah Shem, we're going to talk about these dinim of Mitame Yasiyadayim. But first, the Gemara wants to analyze Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi comes up with this gradations of sleep. Rabbi Yossi Omer nisnamnu yochelu, but nirdumu lo yochelu. Echi dami nisnamne. What is called misnamne, which is not considered sleep, according to Rabbi Yossi, and you're allowed to continue eating the Pesach. Omer of Ashi, nim velo nim, tir velo tir. Nim means sleeping, velo nim. He's asleep, but he's not asleep. Tir, velo tir. Tir means he's awake, but he's not awake. What does that mean? Kigon, de kari levi ani. If you call his name, he will respond. He's not totally asleep. Velo yada ladure savara. He will not know how to respond to you. In other words, you have to get him all the way awake in order for him to respond to you. But if you'll remind him, then he'll know what's correct and what's not correct. So he's in that middle stage. Now the Gemara tells the story. Abai Avi Yosef coming to Rabbah. So Abai was the student of Rabbah. He was at the Seder of his Rebbe. Now he's in a bind here because Abai realizes that his Rebbe, who's a little bit older, fell asleep. And Abai was a little bit afraid to wake up his Rebbe, obviously. But on the other hand, his Rebbe had begun to eat matzah and he fell asleep. So he wanted to wake up his Rebbe. Amalei, so he turns to Rabbah, and he says, Menam kanoi mar. Mar means, Adoni, my master, you're asleep. And when you wake up, you won't be allowed to eat any more matzah, as we saw in our mission with regard to Korban Pesach. Now, Abaye is assuming an analogy, an equation between Korban Pesach and Achilas Matzah. That just like Korban Pesach is a mitzvah d'oraisa when the Mikdash stood, so to Achilas Matzah b'zman hazeh, even without the Korban, there's likewise a mitzvah d'oraisa. And the Easter of Lo Yoshem, and that if you fall asleep you don't eat, applies not only to Pesach but even to Matzah. We're going to see this a little bit later. So Rabbah was eating with a Chabura, and the rest of the Chabura, the other members of the Chabura, did not fall asleep, but Rabbah himself, the master, fell asleep. Abaye was with him, he wasn't asleep. So Abaye, basically invoking Rabbi Yossi in our Mishnah, tells his Rebbe Rabbah that even though we're awake, but if you fall asleep and you're totally asleep, you won't be able to continue eating the matzah. So Abaye wanted to see if maybe, Rabbah was still awake, if he would respond. So he was in that state of twilight zone of nim v'lo nim, tir v'lo tir. So Rabbah responded, yes, I was dozing off, but I wasn't in a state of nirdamti. I wasn't nirdamti. Utran, Rabbi Yossi said, nisnamnu yochelu, that if some members, but not the entire group of the Chabura, fell into a state of dozing, then when they get out of that state, they can continue eating. It's only nirdu lo yochelu, but I wasn't in the state of nirdu. The Mishnah says because it's Xeris Chacham and Pigel and Nosar, that after the Sof Zman Achila, when it became Nosar, it's Mitami Yasiyadayim. Anyone who touches the Nosar becomes Tomei. And the same thing applies, says the Mishnah, to Pesach after Chatzos. Alma, we see clearly from our Mishnah that Mechatzos, Havile Nosar, already at midnight on the 15th, it becomes Nosar. Mantana, we know that whenever you are given an allotment of time on a Doraisa level to eat the Kodshim, you get the entire period of time, the entire Laila. So who's the Tana whose sheet is reflected at Mishnah? Already at midnight it became Nosar. Rav Yosef Rabbi Lozman Azari, he has a unique shita. The Sanya we learned to the Brisa, the Torah says with regard to Korban Pesach in Parshas Bo, Yochlu es habasar b'layla zeh. And what is b'layla zeh, meaning the entire night? No. Says Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah, Nemar Khan, he has a Xerisham, b'layla zeh, the Nemar lahalon, a little bit later on in the same parak, a few psukim later, with regard to Makas Bechoros. The Avarti, the Eretz Mitzrayim, b'layla zeh v'kesi kol v'cha. So we have now Xeris Shava, because in both psukim it says b'layla zeh. Mala halon, just like in the case of Makas Bechoros, ad chatzos, the Makkah took place at chatzos laila. Now it says ad chatzos, however, it really means bechatzos, because it says vayehi bechatzia laila hika kol bechor be'eretz Mitzrayim. So Makas Bechoros took place instantaneously at chatzos. Is afkan here also in the case of Korban Pesach, where it says v'yachlu es habasar b'layla hazeh, right? The same two words b'layla hazeh is ad chatzos. We can only eat the Korban Pesach up until chatzos, and afterwards we cannot eat the Korban Pesach. It becomes nosar. Now this requires a lot of work over here, because I remember hearing from my Rebbe Rav Soloveitchik many years ago that even according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah, it's not fully nosar yet, because although you can't eat the basar b'toras kiyuv mitzvahs matzah, kiyuv mitzvahs korban pesach, by virtue of this gzeira shava, but nevertheless, it still is basar kodshim, and you might have a kiyuv of achilas kodshim to prevent it. So there may be two dinim in nosar. Again, this is very lovely. Amalo Rabbi Akiva disagrees with Rabbi Lozman Azariah. According to Rabbi Akiva, you can eat the Korban Pesach until daybreak the next morning, and it's not noser until then. Follow Nemar, what are you going to do with the pasuk in Korban Pesach? And it says there in Parashas Bo V'achaltem also b'chipazon. And what does that mean, b'chipazon? What are we going to derive for the word b'chipazon? That the Zman of Achila is ad shas chipazon, right? The Torah is telling us that v'achaltem also until shas chipazon. And shas chipazon means the time that Bnei Yisrael left Mitzrayim, the actual moment of the Exodus. So it's true that Makas B'choros took place at midnight, but the actual Yitzia, the Exodus from Mitzrayim, took place with Alos HaShachar the next morning, with daybreak. And that's when Nechbezu Bnei Yisrael Atzeis Mitzrayim. So now, Rabbi Akiva has the word chipazon, and if that be the case, then Rabbi Akiva derives from chipazon that when they left Mitzrayim, which is at Alos HaShachar the next morning, at that point, it became nosar. That was the end of the achila, because it says v'achaltem osam b'chipazon, which means man chipazon. And now it comes out that Rabbi Akiva doesn't have the Gzeret Shava of Balayla Zeh, Balayla Zeh. Imkei matam alomer Balayla. What do I do with these words? And he's going to darshan that Balayla is necessary. Why? If not for the word Balayla, Yochel, I would think, Yei Nechal, Kikodshim, beyond. Now, the Shchitas HaPesach takes place on the 14th of Nisan. And in all Kodshim, we give you that day, the balance of that day, to eat the Kodshim, plus the night that follows it. And therefore, I would think the Korban Pesach should fit into the pattern, the general pattern of all Kodshim, and we could be able to eat the Korban Pesach on the 14th by day, meaning before the end of the day. Talmud Lomer Balayla. Why did the Torah emphasize and add the word Balayla? Balayla hu nechal. Only after the 14th is over. Veino nechal b'yom. You can't eat it during the day of the 14th. You have to wait until Laila, and then you could eat it. But you can eat it for the entire Laila until Shas Chipazon. And the Shas Chipazon, as we said before, is Alos HaShach. So it comes out that Rabbi Lozman Azariah is the Tana that learned and taught now Mishnah, because according to him, the Pesach has to be eaten before Chatzos, based on the Gzeret Shava Balayla Zeh to Makas B'choros. And therefore, after Chatzos, you're not allowed to eat the Korban Pesach, it becomes Nosa. But Rabbi Akiva holds that the Pesach is not Nosa until Alos HaShachar. So now the Gemara understood that Rabbi Akiva explained the word Balayla to teach you that you have to wait until nightfall, and you cannot eat the Korban Pesach by day of the 14th. But what's Hazeh? Rabbi Akiva, hi, this word Hazeh, my ovidly. What does he do with the extra word Hazeh? Iboile limute laila acher udi os. I might think that the Torah commands me to wait until nightfall of the 15th to eat the Korban Pesach. But the following night, that's the night going into the 16th, is also appropriate for the mitzvah of Achilas HaPesach. So we're not going to limit you to Leil Tes Vav. We're going to add Leil Tes Zayin as well. Salkedait Chamina. Why would I entertain such a Havamina? That not only do we give you the night of the 15th, but also the following night, the night of the 16th. Hoil uPesach Kodshim Kalim. Beautiful. We feel so comfortable with this Gemara. We're oriented. Pesach is Kodshim Kalim, like Shlomim. Kodshim Kalim, we give you not only the night and the following day, but we give you the night after that day. So you'll get an extra night of eating. Holu Pesach Kodshim Kalim. Ushlomim Kodshim Kalim, Ma Shlomim Echol M'shnei Yomim. In other words, you get the the day of the Shechita itself, plus you get the next day, the Laila Echad, and the night between these 2 days, is Af Pesach, Okim Halelos V'Mokum Yamin. All we do, we create a chart. And in the case of Pesach, we substitute Laila for Yom of Shlomim. So in Yom of Shlomim, we have 1 Yom, 1 Laila, and the following Yom. 2 days, meaning 12-hour periods, and the night in between. So we give you 3 onos. We can apply the same thing to Karban Pesach. And what we do is Okim Leilos Bimkom Yom. Yehi Nechal, L'Shnei Leilos Yom Echad. We give you 3 onos, 3 periods of 12 hours each. We'll start with the night of the 15th. We'll give you the day of the 15th and the night going into the 16th until the day of the 16th. It'll only become no sir the day of the 16th. It's therefore because Rahmana Hazeh to exclude the second night and to tell you can only eat the Karban Pesach on that night. Rabbi Losman Azariah, Amalecha, he's going to tell you against Rabbi Akiva, counter argue. This pasuk is not coming to teach us this. But Milosa Suad Boker Naftal, we've already derived from the Gzeir Shavah B'Layla Zeh that the latest time to eat the Karban Pesach is Chatzos at the time of the Makas Bechoros. And therefore, Memela, I know that you can't eat it beyond that. And it's an Isa Nosa. So I don't need anyone to teach me through a separate pasuk. I can't eat the Karban Pesach on the Tesvav, and certainly not the night going into Tes Zayin, because the Torah says it's already Nosar at Chatzos on Tesvav. Rabbi Akiva Amar Lecha Ilo Kasav Achmona Hazeh Hava Amino. I would have thought that we should derive from Shlomim that Pesach is eaten for 2 nights. Umay Boker. And what does the Torah mean when it says Lo Sasiru Menu at Boker? Boker Sheni. It means the second day, which is the 16th of Nisan. Rabbi Lazar Melcha Kol Heichel Ichsiv Boker Boker Rishon. Whenever the Torah says Boker, it always means the first Boker. Now you're adding a second Boker. So we should derive that the Pesach cannot be eaten except for the first night. And it says Boker. I don't need the word Hazeh to teach me that it's not Nechal for Shtei Leil. It's already Boker, it became Nosa. And this is where we have that issue about exactly what din of Nosar takes place and when it's a Chal. Omar Rav, Ochal Matzah Bizman Hazel Liachar Chatzos, or Belozman Azariah Liotzi Deichel Masa. And Rav is maintaining an equation between Matzah and Pesach. Just like according to Rabbi Lozman Azariah, the latest time for eating Karban Pesach is Chatzos. That's a Doraisa. So too, Bisman Hazeh, we have a mitzvah Doraisa of Matzah. It's Eino Nechal Ela Ad Chatzos. So the Gemara says, Pshita, I would have come to that conclusion even without Rava. Why? The Iskash Matzah LePesach. We have a hekesh between Achilus Matzah and Achilus Pesach. In the parsha, in Baloscha Achilus HaPesach, it says, Al Matzah Zumrom Yochlu. Pesach Domi. That the Torah is equating here matzah with Pesach. And therefore, according to Rabbi Lozman Azariah, the latest time to eat the Pesach is Chatzos. Ipso facto, the latest time to eat matzah is Chatzos. Gemara says, no, I need Rav. What's Rav going to teach me? Mal the I would have thought. Ha afke kra me'akesha. The Torah removed this pasuk from the Hekesh to Karban Pesach. We're not going to learn from the Karban Pesach. Like we learned earlier on Amid Aleph, if you recall, that the pasuk says Sheishes Yomim Tochal Matzos U'Biyom HaShvi Atzeres. That just like Shvi is a rishus, so too all 6 days are a rishus. And we would have included even the first night as a rishus, except that the Torah came to teach me Barav Tochal Matzos. Then on the first night, it's a chiyuv, and it's not like a Karban Pesach, where, just 1 second, Enoch Karban Pesach, Ochel Matzah Ad HaBoker. I would have thought that since the Torah took matzah out of Just 1 second. I'm sorry, I lost it for a second. Hotel Cosmic Cake to Korban Pesach. Why? Chase Yom Tav. Yom Hashvi Atzeres. Mashvi Rishus Avsheshes Yom Rishus. Is Yesh Lomdo Bisman Azeh. Now, Pasuk Be'erev Tochlu Matzahs. Oh, perfect. In other words, the Torah has enjoined us with a separate independent chiyuv of achilas matzah, which is derived from its own pasuk, but erev tochlu matzah. So you want to say, well, there's a hekesh between matzah and Pesach that would limit, according to Rabbi and Azariah, the achilas zman achilas matzah up to chatzos but not beyond, like achilas Pesach, and you're basing yourself on the equation that's reflected in the pasuk al matzah morim yochlu. But wait a second, forget about al matzah morim yochlu. Matzah has its own independent source. There's a separate mitzvah b'fnei atzma of achilas matzah, and that's derived from ba'erev tochlu matzahs. Therefore, it's not included in the hekesh because it's a separate mitzvah. And any mitzvah salayla allows me the entire course of the night. So why should I be limited like Korban Pesach to eat the matzah up to chatzos? Kamashmal, and that's what Rav wants to teach us. A gavaldig chiddush. And that is the chi ahadre kra, when the pasuk now goes back and teaches us the din of matzah in our time when we don't have the Korban Pesach. That's the right for the pasuk erev tochlu matzahs. Lemilsa kamaisa ahadre. It brings us back to the first din and the original matzah that existed on a deraisa level at the time of the Korban Pesach, and that matzah has the din of Korban Pesach, which means that according to Rabbi and Azariah, the Zman of Achilas Matzah in our time is up to Chatzos, but not beyond, just like the time of the Achilas Matzah together with the Korban Pesach, when the Mikdash stood, was up until Chatzos and not beyond. So although Rava has to admit, nobody denies it, I mean, at least Rava doesn't deny it, that there's an independent mitzvah of Achilas Matzah, Bisman Hazeh, without Pesach, derived from Erev Tochlu Matzahs, but nevertheless, since at the time of the Beis Hamikdash, matzah was eaten with the Pesach, and matzah Bisman Hazeh is also included in that equation to Pesach, insofar as both have the same limitation in Zman, the restriction or the Sof Zman, that the Sof Zman of Pesach is, going to Rabbi Chatzos, so too the Sof Zman of Matzah is Chatzos. Now the next sugya, which we'll have to leave till tomorrow, is about Tumas Yadayim in the cases of Pigul and Nosar, and they were established by the Chacham. The Gemara is going to quote a Machlokas, two opinions as to why the Chacham felt compelled to enact that Tumas Yadayim in the cases of Nosar and Pigul. So that'll be for Daf Kuf Chaf Aleph Bezrat Hashem.
Thank you, Rabbi. Have a good day.
You too. Have a good day. Find, David, that tomorrow we actually finish the Masechet.
Right.
Because Kuf Chaf Aleph, it's the last daf. Now, Rabbi Myers asked me to give the Siyum on Thursday. You know that the Siyum Titus Bechoros this year is one day earlier. It's not an Erev Pesach because we can't fast on Shabbos.
Erev Shabbos.
So we're going to fast on Erev Shabbos. No, I'm sorry. What did I mean to say? You're right. I'm sorry. I stay corrected. I'm a little bit tired. I'm going on almost zero sleep. What I meant to say was that normally we'd be fasting. 1 second, let me get this straight. We would normally be fasting
on Shabbos, and now we push it back Friday. On Friday, you can't fast
because it's Erev Shabbos.
They push it back to Thursday.
Right. So therefore, we push to Thursday. So he told me that in the Emek Learning Center, they'll have a Siyum, I think he said it'd be 8:10 a.m. on Thursday morning, and he wants me to give the Siyum. So it could be tomorrow. I'll leave 1 or 2 lines out at the end so I can push off the Siyum. Now, this means that on Tuesday we start Masechet Shkolim. You have access to Masechet Shkolim, or you use the Sefaria? What kind of Gemara do you have for Shkolim? You have
I'm using the Sefaria on the computer. While I learn with you, I've got the
right,
Sefaria on the computer, and it's got the translation, and
right,
it's very convenient.
right.
Could
Okay, I'm
not
just saying, I don't know Sefaria on Shkolim. I don't know what edition they're using. Shkolim is Yerushalmi, so there are many different editions of the Yerushalmi. I'm going to be using mostly the Mesifta, and once in a while we'll use the Art Scroll. I'm a little bit scared, I'm understating it, of Shkolim, because I never learned Yerushalmi in my life, and it's different than learning Bavli. So bear with me, I'm going to be really strong. I think I'm going to have a rougher time with Shkolim than I had with Erevin. I don't know, I'm not sure. Tell that to Bob Dale, Okay, then, so have a great day, and thanks for persevering with me.
Thank you. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Shavua Tov and Chodesh Tov.